The word of the law is written to create law-abiding subjects. In equal measure, the law is written to create outlaws. For civilization to function as it does, the jails must be full. The streets must be war zones. Disorder legitimates authority. Imprisonment legitimates slavery. The rich and powerful can only hold on to as much power as the police can protect. And it is the presence of crime that justifies the presence of police. Retirement plans would not be nearly as valuable were they not exposed to so many lucrative scams and genocides. Were it not for minimum wage violations, unpaid overtime, and undocumented labor, the stock market would enter a headlong freefall. Without blackmail, governments would be in a state of constant gridlock. The breaking of the law is as vital to the system as the law itself. Without crime, this old world would come apart at the seams. What you are about to hear is a true story. All of this really happened. If at any point in this story you think to yourself that I'm making it up, then I wouldn't be surprised. But I'm not making it up. This is all real. This is what it's really like. On the other hand, maybe you know this story is true because you've heard it before, off of some YouTube video or an article written some years ago. Maybe you've heard this story before, but I guarantee you haven't heard the half of it. This is a story about a South African computer geek who would grow up to become one of the world's foremost business magnates. Known throughout his childhood as a socially awkward tech genius, he left South Africa in the 90s to pursue a career in software development. In the 2000s, he wrote a program which would change the internet forever, and spiraled upwards into a life of wealth and success. By the end of the decade, his companies were pulling in revenues equal to that of Facebook.com. It wasn't long before the success got to his head. As his riches grew, he began designing on world domination. Slowly but surely, he leveraged his immense wealth to take control of entire governments through bribery and deceit. The media has compared him to a James Bond villain, because the scope of his operations were nearly limitless. He was politically involved in every corner of the earth, all the while inventing rockets and submarines and payment systems. He even resolved to populate the planet with hundreds of his own offspring, which he would have with dozens of different women. This is the story of a man named Paul Le Roux. This is a story about sex, drugs, violence, money, and power. This story will take us all over the world, through war-torn nations in East Africa to remote islands in the South Pacific. We will go from embassies in Iran to meth labs in North Korea. If you've been tricked into thinking that professional hitmen do not exist, then disabuse yourself of that now, because you will learn that they most certainly do. You will learn the value of a man's life in American dollars, and Philippine pesos, and shekels, and euros, and rupees, and shillings. You will meet people who kill for money. You will meet people who kill for fun. You will listen as the old world lets out its final death rattle. You will listen to the shrieking of a new world as it struggles to be born. You will watch as monsters walk the earth, and you'll stare into the eyes of those monsters to whom we have ceded control of everything. I will tell this story in as close to chronological order as I possibly can. Beginning in Zimbabwe, 1972. In the 70s, Zimbabwe was called Rhodesia.
Says the white South African.
I'm from Rhodesia.
We say Zimbabwe now, don't we?
Do we?
Last time I checked.
Rhodesia was similar to South Africa in that the majority of the population was black, but a white minority maintained full control of the government and the economy. The most important thing to know about white culture in Rhodesia in the early 70s is that they were in the throes of something called Osmond Mania. The Osmond Brothers were a Mormon rock and roll band from Utah, who at the time were billed as something like the White Jackson 5. This is not to say that the whites of Rhodesia particularly cared about the band. Osmond Mania referred to their obsession with Jimmy Osmond, who was the youngest member. They were so taken by this 9-year-old Mormon child for reasons I couldn't quite say, but his music was adored by white Rhodesia. It all started with the release of the 1972 single Long-Haired Lover from Liverpool. The song did okay on the US charts, but was a Christmas triumph on Rhodesian and South African radio, which were both almost exclusively owned and operated by whites. After that, his music could hardly be seen anywhere but at the #1 spot on the Rhodesian charts. In 1974, the South African record industry tried to manufacture a kind of long-distance romance between Jimmy and Gwyneth Jobert, the 12-year-old daughter of a pleasure resort owner in Randfontein. Jobert's name was changed to Gwyneth Ashley Robin prior to the release of her 1974 single, Little Jimmy, which received tepid success in the South African market, but became something like the flagship song of Rhodesian whites.
Little Jimmy, you're a star. The whole wide world knows who you are. I really hope you never grow, 'cause there's one thing that you should know, little Jimmy, I love you.
Steady, I'm trying to doors open. Yes, section doors. Steady, right touch, I've got them in the field. Steady, I'm gonna get them. Yes, steady, fucking beautiful. Steady, now, one, we're running. Beautiful. Jesus Christ, you wanna see all those fuckers? The fucking bombs are beautiful. Fucking magnificent. That's what it is, fucker. They're like fucking ants running around there, eh?
Nowhere was Gwyneth Ashley Robin more well received than on the front lines of the Rhodesian Bush War. There, the 14-year-old pop star performed for crowds of her young male fans, fighting on the white side of what they were calling Africa's Vietnam.
Tonight, 4 black schoolboys are spending their 19th night in prison without a charge.
In case Mr. Heath and company may feel this bunch is just a horde of extremists, I'll give him a practical example. There is a certain degree of tolerance in a chained, tame animal. You may pester it for the first time, and you can do that for as many times as you like. But a time will come when that big chain will snap and the big animal will remove its tail from its hind legs. Then it will start, barking. Then from barking, it will bite.
The first war in which machine guns were ever used was the First Matabele War. This war started in 1893 between a race of Africans called the Matabele and a British mining company owned by a man named Cecil Rhodes. To secure his mining interests in the Matabele territory, Rhodes sent a small detachment of company soldiers with 5 fully automatic Maxim guns to flatten the Matabele army. At 600 rounds per minute, the Maxim gun's full metal jacket projectiles would pierce the Matabele's cowhide shields with ease. When the Matabele rose again in revolt against Cecil Rhodes and his company, Rhodes instructed his soldiers to enact maximal harm against all natives, to kill on sight every black even if their backs were turned and their arms were laid flat on the ground. This was his order until the Matabele's religious leaders were assassinated and their capacity to rebel was ground to a halt. It was then after Cecil Rhodes that Rhodesia got its name. His vision for Rhodesia was one in which the blacks were driven from their land and forced into lives of manual labor at the service of white-owned corporations. Cecil's vision was fully realized. 70 years later, the blacks, having been totally proletarianized, would revolt again, triggering the Rhodesian Bush War. The Bush War went by many names, the aforementioned being the name given to it by white Rhodesian media. This name was meant to belittle the conflict, to create a sense of security within urban and suburban white Rhodesians. To call it a bush war reassured the white populace that they were safe to listen to their rock and roll music and drink Canada Dry while the army went romping through the hinterlands. The Matabele, on the other hand, called it the Second Umvukela, the first Umvukela being their failed uprising against Cecil Rhodes. The Shona people called it the Second Chimurenga, which, like Umvukela, means revolutionary war. Throughout the war, whites and blacks lived in totally distinct realities. The whites believed that Rhodesia was like that of the United States or the United Kingdom, in that it was prosperous and safe despite the existence of racial tension, which was on course to be resolved within everyone's lifetime anyway. The blacks understood themselves to be on the winning side of a revolutionary struggle, to reclaim their homeland and correct the course of history. These opposing realities coexisted all through the 1970s. But in 1980, when the white government's options were exhausted, Robert Mugabe of the Zimbabwe African National Liberation Army was declared Prime Minister of the newly named Zimbabwe. To the bitter end, the whites plotted coups d'etats and assassination attempts against Mugabe, but nothing they had thought of could ever resist the tide of black victory. When you're outnumbered 20-1, there can be no victory unless your enemy doesn't realize you're their enemy. But in Zimbabwe, it was much too late for that. There had been too much bloodshed. Too many men, women, and children felled by the machine gun, the bomb, the tank, the bag of anthrax. History does not know defeat. History is a wall stretching from one end of the universe to the other. There is no getting around it, only along. Paul Le Roux was born white on the 24th of December, 1972. The day the whites lost Rhodesia must have been one of his first memories. He was 7 years old then, living next to a major asbestos mine which was managed by his father. Paul Le Roux was adored by his entire family. He was the boy his cousins were told to watch and learn from, to act like. He was popular among his grandparents, his aunts, his uncles, and his parents reckoned him faultless, their perfect only child. He was smart, polite, and well-behaved at school. He could do no wrong in the eyes of anyone around him. He was unique among Rhodesian boys because he showed very little interest in sports, but what he lacked in athleticism he certainly made up for as a student. He was very academically talented. Meanwhile, year after year, white families like the Le Roux were migrating away from Zimbabwe in droves, fearing that Mugabe's government would seek retribution against them once his power had solidified. Within 5 years of Mugabe's victory, almost 2/3 of white Zimbabweans had left the country. Paul Le Roux was attending a private boarding school during the height of this white exodus. It appears that his parents wanted him as insulated as possible from this new black Zimbabwe. To their credit, they stayed in Zim for much longer than most whites. It wasn't until 1984 that the Le Roux left for South Africa. Let's recap. Rhodesia was a nation on the African continent ruled by a white minority. But in 1980, a black government came to power and changed the name of Rhodesia to Zimbabwe. This caused most of the whites to abandon the country and cross the border into South Africa. Among these white emigres was a young boy named Paul Le Roux and his family.
Ach, please, Daddy, won't you take us to the drive-in? Oh, 6, 7 of us, 8, 9, 10. We wanna see a flick about Tarzan and the Ape Men. And when the show's over, you can bring us back again.
Paul Le Roux and his family moved to Krugersdorp, just outside Johannesburg. His father founded a coal mining management company there, and they soon became fairly wealthy. Paul was sent to a whites-only high school where he grew into his teen years. Paul Le Roux is the main character of this story, so it's important you have a clear idea of what he looked like. He was 6 feet tall and mesomorphic. He had warm-toned light olive skin and long thick hair the color of black licorice. He had deep-set black eyes, a narrow Greek nose, patchy black stubble, and a strong jaw. He was very handsome and physically fit and intelligent, which is why it struck others as strange that he was so withdrawn. The older he got, the less interested he was in his own social life. He did not attend parties, he did not bother with girls, he seldom even left his bedroom. What was a precocious young boy ripened into a pensive young man. He grew more intelligent than his peers, than his family. It wasn't long before he was simply too smart for his teachers to teach him. The values of his community became primitive to him. The pop stars, the Springboks, the tins of Milo, the cricket fields, the golf courses. He hated how everything in South Africa was either green or brown. He hated the bright sunny days in Krugersdorp in the afternoon sun showers. He hated his country and the people in it. He did not hate all these things for their injustices. He did not hate them because they were built on apartheid, imperialism, and centuries of blood. He hated it all because it was so dumb, so moronic that it felt pointless and fake. His school tried to make him learn Afrikaans, but he patently refused. He called it a dead language, he said he was never going to learn it, and he never did. What were the people around him going to do? How do you tell a kid who aces every exam to wise up? How do you instill your values into someone who already came up with their own? How do you get to the bottom of someone who can see through you the moment you walk through the door? Paul Le Roux felt shackled, imprisoned, and the older he got, the more he started to view the people in his life like prison guards, intermittently checking to see that the locks on his cage were still holding fast. One day, in 1989, the Le Roux residence was suddenly raided by several officers of the South African police. They stormed into Paul's room, cuffed him, and carted him off to the squad car. He just laughed to himself as it drove away. The remaining police officers at the Le Roux residence explained to his parents that he had been selling pornography magazines to other students at his school. Pornography was strictly illegal under the apartheid government, so his parents could not have been more dismayed. Paul didn't even care, he found it funny. Matter of fact, he was proud of it and the money he made. The whole thing brought great shame to his family, and they gave him shit for it, but he didn't care. He just spent less time outside and more time in his room. Besides, he had just gotten something. A machine. The kind of a machine that if you use it right, the whole world around you melts away and gets replaced with something new, something of your choice, something real, something realer than real. At 16 years of age, Paul Le Roux got his first computer. He sat down, put his hands on the keyboard, and at that moment, the locks on his cage sprung open.
Multi-millions still unfair. Armando Gino giving head.
We live in a peaceful, prosperous time, but we can make it better. For a new breeze is blowing, and a world refreshed by freedom seems reborn. For in man's heart, if not in fact, the day of the dictator is over. The totalitarian era is passing. Great nations of the world are moving toward democracy, through the door to freedom. Men and women of the world move toward free markets, through the door to prosperity.
When it comes to 3-month-old Seven, Vashon, you are not.
It's down like a great big pussy, just waiting to get fucked.
We know what works. Freedom works. We know what's right. Freedom is right. We know how to secure a more just and prosperous life for man on earth through free markets and the exercise of free will unhampered by the state. For the first time in perhaps all history, man does not have to invent a system by which to live. We don't have to talk late into the night about which form of government is better. We don't have to wrest justice.
Mr. Gorbachev,
Kings.
Tear down this wall.
We only have to summon it from within ourselves.
This is a story about cyber-utopianism, techno-libertarianism, white supremacy, masculinity, sex, drugs, violence, money, and power. This is a story about how we got here, where we are going, and what it's really like. I'm Arthur O'Keefe, and this is One World Mix. In 1858, Karl Marx wrote that the spread of capitalism necessitated the annihilation of space by time. By this, he meant that capital would spread as far and wide over the world as it possibly could, creating the need for communication and transport over great distances to be completed in shorter and shorter periods of time. If it was so that a British businessman wished to invest in Burmese textiles, capital would dictate that his investment need not wait. The earth separating the Mediterranean and the Red Sea would be displaced to form a canal. Wind patterns over the Indian Ocean would be met with the utmost disregard by triple expansion steamships. Instantaneous communication would be established between the investor and his investment by way of a submarine telegraph cable stretching 100,000 miles under the Atlantic and Indian Oceans. Since the inception of capitalism, space and time have been subservient to capital. In no machine is this relationship crystallized more clearly than in the computer, which offers constant, abundant, instant communication with the entire world all at once. The computer is, effectively, a gateway into a series of physics-defying highways between all locations on the Earth. A computer, it could be said, is the entire universe pulverized into a single machine that could fit inside one's bedroom and eventually one's pocket. For Paul Le Roux, there could be no greater gift to him than that of a computer. He felt trapped in a place that he hated with all his being. He felt as if his soul was being strangled by his locality. The introduction of computers into his life effectively tore this sense of strangulation asunder. Off the computer, Le Roux was stuck in Krugersdorp, but on the computer, Le Roux was in every single location at once. He was at a terminal connecting all things in existence. The computer was a valve which decontained his enormous spirit. The computer unleashed him, unshackled him, or at least these were his ambitions for the machine. In the late 1980s, it could not be said of South Africa that it had a very sophisticated IT infrastructure. The internet was limited to academic and research institutions, and consumer access to computing machines was very poor in comparison to nations like the US or UK. This period of time for Paul Le Roux, after he first obtained a computer, was a time of incessant and obsessive research of computing on its most basic levels. The reality was that there was very little you could actually do on a computer at this time, other than play around on it and see how it works. This task was apparently enrapturing enough for Paul Le Roux to want to drop out of high school to focus on. Most of what Paul Le Roux learned about computing in these years came from physical textbooks, which he had ordered in such high quantities that they began to seriously congest his bedroom. Le Roux did experiment with attending classes on computing in Johannesburg, but his knowledge of the subject dwarfed that of the teachers, to the extent that they took offense to his displays of learnedness and forbade him from attending any more classes.
Free Nelson Mandela. Free, 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 free Nelson Mandela.
In pursuance of my opening address to Parliament, I am now in a position to announce that Mr. Nelson Mandela will be released at the Victor Verster prison on Sunday, the 11th of February, at about 3 p.m.
I greet you all in the name of peace, democracy and freedom for all. I stand here before you not as a prophet, but as a humble servant of you, the people.
Around the time of Nelson Mandela's release from prison, the Le Roux family set out on a family vacation across the United States of America.
Dad, we're playing.
Okay, shut off the video games. Come on, Russ. Shut it off. I know you'll enjoy this. I've worked out the whole trip on the computer so we get the maximum amount of fun time at Wally World without missing any of the good stuff along the way. Go. There's us, and there's Wally World. Now let's just take a look at day one, shall we?
The Le Roux went all about the USA in Paul Le Roux's first excursion outside of Africa. Riding in cabs through the streets of Manhattan, barreling through tired old towns in the Deep South, Paul was separated from his computer, which in any other circumstance would have been abominable. But America had an effect on Paul like very few other places ever would. He was content to look up out the window, take in the sights, to feel, to live and breathe America for as long as he was there, because he found it all so captivating. A lifetime of perceiving America by proxy of its films and television shows had led Paul Le Roux to suspect that America was much more mundane in reality. But he was jarred to find that Americans really do think, talk, and act like they do in the movies. The flag really is red, white, and blue, and the people are white, but some of them are black, and the money is green. Green like algae. In America, representation precedes reality. Anywhere else, first comes the desire, then comes the commercial. In America, it goes the other way round. Reality is shaped in the image of media. Paul Le Roux was looking around, waiting for someone to yell, "Cut," but they never did. In Krugersdorp, Paul Le Roux lived right next to a nature reserve, where lived herds of white rhinos and giraffes and wildebeests. At night, Paul could hear the cackling of hyenas, and now and again, a pride of lionesses would go prowling through the streets. In the US, safari was no more than a theme on a slot machine, but somehow, to Paul Le Roux, it felt more real. Looking in the mirror at a hotel in Florida, Paul Le Roux began to truly take shape. Unknowingly, Paul had made his pilgrimage to the promised land. America was, in all ways, the sacred valley of the universe, the Mount Olympus of the Western world, the land of the gods. If the computer could shred time and space into thin strands and weave of it whatever the user wished, America appeared as a 2 billion acre weavery. America is the dream time, the happy hunting ground, the heavens, the netherworld. America is the Bible, the Holy Land, Jerusalem, Nazareth, Paris, London, Rome, Babylon, the Garden of Eden. America is everything all the time in one place, everywhere.
Now, the 28 countries with forces in the Gulf area have exhausted all reasonable efforts to reach a peaceful resolution, have no choice but to drive Saddam from Kuwait by force. We will not fail. As I report to you, air attacks are underway against military targets in Iraq. We are determined to knock out Saddam Hussein's nuclear bomb potential. We will also destroy his chemical weapons facilities. Much of Saddam's artillery and tanks will be destroyed. Our operations are designed to best protect the lives of all the coalition forces by targeting Saddam's vast military arsenal.
I found someone in Durham who had been, a lot of North Carolina people go to the war. I found a young pilot, and he said, it was very exciting. And then he went on to explain to me how the sites that they used in order to, fire their smart bombs were just like the games in the arcade that he grew up with. Said, no way in the world could he have had better practice than he got in those arcades. I talked to a woman who had been on the ground in a Jeep for most of it. And she went, the desert's so big and the sand. She said, but I really didn't get a feel for it till I got home and saw what my husband had taken.
The crescendo of Paul Le Roux's journey was his visit to Disneyland. Whatever Paul Le Roux had in terms of an adolescent search for meaning must have been resolved in large part here. Teenagers like Le Roux spend a lot of time thumbing through perspectives and worldviews in hopes they might finally get to the bottom of the question of existence. At Disneyland, Paul Le Roux decides there is no bottom. This old Earth is an infinitely tall stack of fake bullshit, and you can climb up, perch up, or fall off. Here, he decided there is no hidden meaning to the universe, no grand narrative, no good guys, no bad guys, no God, and no enlightenment. Paul came to believe that authenticity and meaning are false pretensions, destined to be sandblasted by the future. Paul saw the United States as a truly futuristic nation, because false, plastic versions of everything had already taken the place of their originals.
Hey God, said to Abraham, kill me a son, kill me a son.
In the United States, the one substance that holds real value is not the dollar, but nostalgia. Americans trade in nostalgia. Politicians are bought and paid for in nostalgia. But like the dollar, nostalgia is a currency with no substantive backing. Just as the dollar was decoupled from the gold standard, at a certain point, nostalgia was decoupled from reality itself. Nostalgia is not rooted in history. Americans are nostalgic for a time and place that never existed. Nostalgia finds its value from within itself. Nostalgia is not based on memory. It invents memories. To call this a collective delusion would imply that there is a reality that resides behind the delusion. Paul Le Roux believed staunchly that no such reality existed. What you see is what you get. When Paul Le Roux and his family returned to South Africa, negotiations to end the apartheid system were well underway. Le Roux had no interest in watching another black government come to power. Even less so was he interested in joining the army of the white government, which at the time was compulsory for white men his age. After he turned 18, Paul Le Roux didn't want to stay in South Africa. And he didn't have to. So he bought a one-way ticket to London, England. Le Roux was moving out. To the airport, he lugged several heavy bags filled with all his belongings. But at the gate, they told him it was too much. His bags were too heavy. Not a problem for Le Roux. He unzipped them, took all the clothes out, and boarded the plane with just his programming textbooks. (1991).
Dig.
Shortly after Le Roux touched down at Heathrow, he found a job working for a software development company. But shortly thereafter, he took the opportunity to work remotely for the same company in Seattle, Washington, and then Virginia Beach not long after that. Finally, Paul Le Roux was living and working in the United States as a professional programmer. He was work-obsessed at this time and as asocial as ever. He didn't interact with his co-workers outside of work. The only kind of community he had was one he found on the burgeoning internet.
So you want to be free.
The World Wide Web at this time was not available to the public. What constituted the internet was called Usenet, and it was a network of computers and servers connected via phone lines, which could only really communicate through text forums and message boards. To be on Usenet meant probably that you were a specific kind of guy. The kind of guy that likes and understands this stuff. At the time, only 10% of people in the developed world even used the internet. So this stuff counted as a niche interest for a niche group of people. The people on Usenet communicated with each other using a certain tonality, which if you've even skimmed any old internet forums, you should be quite familiar with. These people were very conceited and passive-aggressive to each other, but made a point to use superficial manners and etiquette to mask the inherent odiousness of their attitudes. This tradition of communication survives in the comment sections under just about any Reddit post. But back then, this is all the internet was. Guys who had a difficult time in high school trying to prove to each other who could be the biggest pedant. Just as soon as this culture was born, so too was born a counterculture from within the forums. A counterculture that Paul was very much a part of. Le Roux was one of the world's first internet trolls. When he wasn't toiling at his job, Paul would go in and rile up message boards with rage bait posted under his full legal name and email address. Simply put, making people mad on the internet was by far and away his preferred mode of social interaction. He would soon return to London at 21 years old, and 1 year later, he followed a woman named Michelle to Australia. 1995.
She call me Mr. Bombastic, tell me fantastic. Touch me on me back, she says I'm Mr. Romantic. Call me fantastic, touch me on me back, she says I'm Mr. Romantic.
At 23, Paul Le Roux married Michelle in Sydney and began programming for an Australian bank, helping digitize the SWIFT system of global bank transfers. The fall of the Soviet Union in 1991 and the ascendance of the United States as the world's only superpower facilitated the creation of a global political order in which free markets and liberal democracy were to be prioritized by every nation-state. Globalization was the result of this order, and Paul Le Roux's life began to exemplify this era of globalism. On the strength of his South African passport, Le Roux had lived in 8 different cities across 5 different countries in just half a decade. Unfortunately, his globetrotting had found him in Australia, which is a country he greatly despised. The Usenet forum Oz.General became the site of some of his most prolific trolls, where his agenda was to attack and belittle the nation of Australia, drawing the ire of many Australian netizens, many of whom threatened to hunt and kill him. It was also while living in Australia that Le Roux began to expound on his political worldview. The 23-year-old Paul Le Roux was, in Rhodesian fashion, a white supremacist. And in the fashion of computer programmers of the time, he was also a libertarian. Where racism was a more casual component of his worldview, libertarianism was something he took quite seriously. He would repeatedly advocate online for lower taxes and the legalization of all drugs. Le Roux believed the Australian government of Paul Keating was an affront to his own political ideals. This is a message board post by Paul Le Roux from November 12, 1995.
Disadvantages of Australia. Australians have far too high an opinion of their country. I have found Australians to be childlike, with an immature view of the world and Australia's place in it. Australians are not very knowledgeable, unlike Europeans who I found are far more sophisticated on average. Tax is far too high for mid/high income earners. Australians have no access to tax havens, unlike US's Delaware or UK's Isle of Man. Australia has too much social security. Australia should not provide a free medical service. Instead, it should make private cover compulsory. Pornography laws in Australia are backwards, with the possession of adult videos an offence in all states but ACT. Drug laws are primitive compared with Europe. The way to combat drugs is in fact to legalise them. Plus, movies are about 6 months behind US.
In 1995, the French government tested some of its nuclear bombs on its Polynesian colonies, sparking protests from some elements of Australian society. On June 17, the French consulate in Perth was firebombed by a Rhodesian-born man named Bosco Boscovich and an Israeli-Australian woman named Maya Katz. These events spawned the infamous French thread on the Oz.General Usenet forum, a thread of which Paul Le Roux became the main antagonist. He was the only person on the Australian internet to support French nuclear testing.
My only problem with their testing is that they are doing it too far east. They need to come west some. Without Australia, there would be a bit more ocean, but far fewer Neanderthals.
In Le Roux's defense of French nuclear testing, he referenced Arthur Desmond's 1896 manifesto, Might is Right, which is one of the texts of social Darwinism, serving as a major theoretical inspiration for the eugenics movement, Nazism, and the Church of Satan. Australian netizens' protests against French nuclear testing morphed into a protest against Paul Le Roux's presence on the internet. Some users changed their screen names as part of these protests. Among them, fuck@you.paul and fuck you Paul Le Roux at fuckoffyoubastard.net. 1996. Paul Le Roux would more or less retire from trolling and commit to more serious political praxis. Meanwhile, the latent libertarian spirit of the early internet would begin to take literal shape. On February 8, John Perry Barlow, lyricist of the Grateful Dead, published his influential Declaration of the Independence of Cyberspace.
Governments of the industrial world, you weary giants of flesh and steel, I come from cyberspace, the new home of mind. On behalf of the future, I ask you of the past to leave us alone. You are not welcome among us. You have no sovereignty where we gather. We have no elected government, nor are we likely to have one, so I address you with no greater authority than that with which liberty itself always speaks. I declare the global social space we are building to be naturally independent of the tyrannies you seek to impose on us. You have no moral right to rule us, nor do you possess any methods of enforcement we have true reason to fear. We are creating a world that all may enter without privilege or prejudice accorded by race, economic power, military force, or station of birth. Your legal concepts of property, expression, identity, movement, and context do not apply to us. They are based on matter. There is no matter here. You are terrified of your own children, since they are natives in a world where you will always be immigrants. Because you fear them, you entrust your bureaucracies with the parental responsibilities you are too cowardly to confront yourselves. In our world, all the sentiments and expressions of humanity, from the debasing to the angelic, are parts of a seamless whole, the global conversation of bits. We cannot separate the air that chokes from the air upon which wings beat. We will create a civilization of the mind in cyberspace. May it be more humane and fair than the world your governments have made before.
Her name is Dolly. 7 months old, she may not be the monster imagined in a science fiction fantasy, yet the cuddly Finn Dorset lamb may represent a major landmark in the history of genetic engineering.
The situation remains tense at the Port Arthur site. Police surrounding the bed and breakfast lodge where the gunman has 3 people hostage.
Confirmation from our very own Foreign Secretary Robin Cook, who's in the Far East at the moment, that Diana, Princess of Wales, has in fact been killed in that car accident.
President Clinton has gone over the electoral top for re-election, 291 to 105, but don't let that deter you from voting in 5 western states.
There it is, 10 o'clock, and we say Tony Blair is to be Prime Minister and a landslide is likely.
Watch me now.
What we know for certain is Bill Gates is the richest man in the country, with the largest fortune any American has ever assembled, more than $11 billion. And he does evoke strong feelings.
Bill Gates gets up here and he says, we finished a great year. $4.6 billion. $4.6 billion. And now I want to hear some enthusiasm for $4.6 billion.
The richest man in the country almost never spends the money to fly first class.
Well, there's no problem in flying. Coach should get there just as fast as first class. And if I was super large, probably sitting in those bigger seats would make a big deal. I take my computer along, and mostly I'm just sitting there.
NBC Thursday, Mercy.
Shit.
Hope and Gloria. Seinfeld. Friends. Must see TV, NBC Thursday.
Paul Le Roux began to believe that it was his duty to protect the internet from belligerent statism. Growing concerns that governments all over the world would overregulate the internet and at once use it to spy on their citizens would prompt Le Roux to investigate encryption as a means to subvert the power of the state and preserve the anarchic qualities of the internet. Paul Le Roux had always aspired to greatness. He was tremendously ambitious and had always believed he was destined to become a man of great consequence. Entering his mid-20s, it appeared to him that his chance had come. 1997.
I like to move it, move it. I like to move it, move it. I like to move it, move it. You like to move it.
Paul Le Roux began to work on E4M. This was to be a free software which could encrypt any file, making it unusable to anyone but the password holder. The code that Le Roux would write this encryption software with would be genuinely innovative and effective, especially considering that he was going to release it for free for everyone. Hence the name, E4M, encryption for the masses. This project would carpet bomb his free time. When he wasn't earning an income programming on the back end of finance technology, he was in his bedroom, toiling away at E4M on his home computer. 1999. Paul Le Roux moved to Brisbane, where he divorced from his wife and released Encryption for the Masses. Before the coming of the new millennium, Le Roux was completely broke and alone.
What will be the nature of the millennium? What will the 1,000-year reign of Christ really be like? What will it be like for you and me living on this earth? Well, just think about it. First of all, perfect peace. Perfect peace. No more Bosnia-Herzegovinas, no more Vietnams. There'll be no more desert storms, no more world wars, no more Somalias. There'll be no more Saddam Husseins and
2000!
The release of E4M left Paul basically penniless. With no wife, no money, and no job, nothing was keeping him in Australia anymore. So he left for Hong Kong, and then Rotterdam in the Netherlands not long after. E4M had generated very little interest outside of a few cryptography forums Le Roux was already a part of. E4M was easily downloadable on a publicly listed page on the World Wide Web. On the website, Le Roux wrote a kind of exegesis of the product.
Privacy is becoming harder to find in the world. Today, everyone everywhere is monitored all the time. Governments issue social security numbers, national insurance numbers, Medicare numbers, ID numbers, passport numbers, tax numbers, and so on. Some governments even go as far as fingerprinting citizens as part of their numbering regime. Combine the two and governments have access to large pools of information about you and your lifestyle. The battle for privacy has long since been lost in the real world. As more and more human activity becomes computerized, governments are scrambling to preserve and extend their powers in the era of the information age and beyond. Strong encryption is the mechanism with which to combat these intrusions, preserve your rights, and guarantee your freedoms in the information age and beyond.
Attached to the website was an advertisement for a newly formed company called SW Professionals, which purported to have 5 staff and a 90-meter square office in Johannesburg. This wasn't true at all. SW Professionals was just Paul Le Roux in his apartment in Rotterdam.
We are offering quality programming services at excellent developing country rates.
Le Roux was absolutely desperate for work, and E4M was a genuinely good product. He thought that the quality of his product would surely land him a contract with someone. But lo, this never happened. He was reduced to begging for work in old Usenet forums.
Hi guys, I'm looking for crypto or other contract programming work. Anybody out there have anything available? If you're reading this group, probably I don't need any introduction, but I can send my CV as needed.
He got no work from these posts, and all his savings dried up. For the rest of the year 2000, it's not exactly clear how Paul Le Roux supported himself while living in Rotterdam. There simply wasn't enough interest in personal data encryption at the time for a product like E4M to generate any interest. But that was about to change, and Paul Le Roux's luck would turn right around. 2001.
Mine's just juice, Mom. Screwdriver.
Mom's totally out of juice. Way to go, wait, sorry.
Gotta drop a
atomic bomb.
It's got to be a war.
Yeah, but a devastating war where people die.
No stopping this.
Burn their eyes out with atomic
hear
bombs.
About casual
and about civilians.
Casualties. We got civilian casualties.
If this guy Bush doesn't go to war right now, I'm telling you,
but you gotta know where to go.
We know where to go.
Well, you know what?
Don't you know?
If they didn't do it, they better surrender right away.
Yeah, they should all surrender right now. Then let Israel loose.
They're not done yet.
They're not done yet. Let Israel loose.
Let Israel loose. We have to do this.
Israel, let the U.S. loose.
Let me tell you something.
We have to go to war
it can be taken care of in an hour. We could wipe them off the face of the earth.
You don't want government who will allow this to happen again to stand.
An hour's too long, Howard. In an hour from now, they could have 6 more planes crash into the city.
Whether you need Israel to do it or the United States to do it, I don't care which.
You know, to me, that alone is a reason to bomb them.
Allow us to bomb them.
While they're out in the streets, throw a bomb on them right now.
Bomb them now in the streets.
Howard, they
drop
have
a
kids
nuclear
in the street,
weapon.
5 years old, jumping up and down, celebrating.
5-year-olds. Those 5-year-olds will grow up to attack our children.
They're showing it right now.
Kill them.
If you look at NBC,
Kill them
Channel
for
4.
celebrating. Kill them.
In their schools, at 5
Look,
years
there
old,
they
they're
are.
being
Here they are. They're all celebrating in the streets. The Palestinians are celebrating in the streets, ladies and gentlemen. They're putting up the victory sign. Children are cheering. The parents have taught them well. Let them all live. Go ahead. Go ahead, and more of us will die.
Wilfried Hafner, a European engineer who knew Paul from the cryptography forums, would approach Le Roux with a job offer. Wilfried had recognized the value of E4M and was looking to put together a team of talented coders to produce a commercial encryption software. He wanted Le Roux to work with Sean Hollingworth, who designed ScramDisk, another open-source encryption software. By combining elements of ScramDisk and E4M using their respective programmers, Wilfried had hoped to create the flagship product of a company he had just founded, called SecureStar. Paul Le Roux accepted and got to work for Wilfried. The pay was abysmal, but Paul Le Roux was just happy to have a job doing what he was passionate about. He remarried shortly thereafter to a Caribbean Chinese woman living in the Netherlands named Lillian Chiang Yuan Pui, and they immediately had a baby. The baby and the marriage put a strain on Le Roux's already paltry income, despite the fact that he was essentially the principal architect of Wilfried Hafner's encryption software, which they began to call DriveCrypt. Paul was getting hard done by Wilfried. It wasn't fair, nor was it standard practice that such an important, skilled, and intelligent member of the team with a newborn baby would be paid so poorly, especially considering that Wilfried was so flush with cash at the time. Paul and his family lived in a tiny studio apartment, and he drove a complete shitbox and had to work tirelessly every single day. But on a personal level, Paul couldn't help but greatly admire Wilfried. His boss represented something he had always aspired to, which was a certain European style of worldliness. Wilfried, in Paul's mind, embodied his cosmopolitan aspirations. He was an ethnic German, born in Italy, living on the French Riviera. He spoke 6 languages, was a successful businessman in the telecom industry, and had a wide range of general knowledge. In many ways, Paul wanted to become Wilfried, which was a task Le Roux thought best initiated by winning his favor. – 2002. Wilfried flew Paul out to the city of Cannes for a weekend of partying and gambling. This was the part of Europe Le Roux liked best. He never cared much for history. He didn't care for ruins and castles, and he thought art was dumb. He liked beachfront hotels, cruise ships, internet cafes, multi-story KFCs with regional menu items. Paul flew back to Rotterdam and started working on a project on the side of his full-time job at SecureStar.
Ayo, Captain Jack! Ayo, Captain Jack! Bring me back to the railroad track! Bring me back to the railroad track!
Run into the railroad track, run along with Captain Jack.
He set out to program an online casino, believing this would ultimately be the solution to his poverty. On his visit to the French Riviera, Paul contracted a kind of insatiable greed. Nothing was more important to him than money. And he believed that releasing an online casino was the only thing standing between him and endless riches. While money was the most important thing to him, a private and ungovernable internet was surely a close second. While working full-time at SecureStar and programming an online casino, Paul began a third endeavor, a new and improved encryption software based on encryption for the masses. It was, like the original E4M, to be free of cost upon release, another one of Paul's political projects. One can imagine the strain he was under during this period. Constant work, desperate poverty, no time to relax. His wife, Lillian, worked long hours as well. They had to leave their child at daycare for 12 hours a day. To live such a way would inevitably cause bouts of delirium. Whether Paul understood what he was doing or not, it became clear to Wilfried that some of the code Le Roux had written for SecureStar had found its way back into the new E4M project. This was a completely human thing for Paul to do. He had spent a decade in the open source community, where the code you write is free to use for anyone, for any reason. Code is not a finite resource. It doesn't make sense to hoard it, to protect it, or at least it didn't make sense to Paul. Wilfried wasn't like Paul. Paul was a programmer. Wilfried